It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe, Friday, November 29th, 2024, the day after Thanksgiving in Los Angeles. He is Sam Park in Los Angeles. I am John Ramey. We have an update on the war in Ukraine and a ceasefire in the Middle East. We will start in the Middle East. Sam, happy Thanksgiving. I am thankful for you. I am thankful for all our listeners, and I'm thankful that we were able to spend Thanksgiving together yesterday.
So am I. It was a wonderful time all the way around.
Unfortunately, there's no good news. I guess there's some good news. A ceasefire is good news. But yeah, you can judge how good this is. All right, so let's start with reporting from the BBC on Wednesday, 2 days ago. A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah has come into effect in Lebanon after more than a year of fighting. It began at 4 in the morning local time Wednesday, putting up an at least temporary end to nearly 14 months of conflict between Israel and the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. The deal was announced on Tuesday by Israel, France, and the United States, with American President Joe Biden saying it aimed to be a, quote, permanent cessation of hostilities. Now, today, Hezbollah's Secretary General has spoken in a televised address. This is Al Jazeera reporting. Naim Qassem declared, quote, divine victory after months of cross-border attacks and fighting with Israeli forces, saying this is a bigger one than in 2006 when Hezbollah went to war with Israel for 34 days. Qassem also described Israel's losses as, quote, massive. He said Hezbollah, quote, approved the ceasefire. And he says Hezbollah is prepared for war if Israel attacks. This has not stopped attacks in the Gaza. We can talk about that, Sam, but reflections on the ceasefire first.
Well, anytime hostilities are reduced, that's, I would say, a good thing. And in this particular case, it seems to have a lot of echoes of 2006. And then the terms of the ceasefire are remarkably similar in that Israel will gradually withdraw its troops from southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah will withdraw from the same region north of the Litani River, which is exactly where the 2006 ceasefire mandated that they should return. We should hope that this ceasefire will be honored much more closely than that one was, because Hezbollah never actually withdrew from southern Lebanon, whereas Israel did. And as we know, Hezbollah has been launching rocket attacks on northern Israel since October 8th of last year. And in fact, even before that, there was a semi-routine exchange of fire between Hezbollah and Israel across the border between Israel and Lebanon. And that was really not much of a ceasefire at all, we might say, even before the Hamas attacks of October 7th last year. But in this case, it really does seem as though it's in everybody's interest that this ceasefire should hold. We should say, by the way, that both sides are already accusing the other of violating the ceasefire. But in the details of the agreement, Israel is supposed to gradually withdraw from southern Lebanon. It's not like they're just leaving right now. And they've, in fact, advised Lebanese people who, about 1 million of which, by the way, have vacated that area over the last year, and especially much more so in the past couple months since Israel has escalated its attacks on Lebanon. Israel has advised those Lebanese people that they should not immediately return to their homes because they are not withdrawing right away. Most of the Lebanese people, or that is many of them, have ignored that directive because they just want to go home, as you might very much want to. And I think that Israeli citizens will start to return to their homes in the north of Israel that they've been absent from for over a year now. And in fact, this was one of the reasons that Israel escalated their attacks on Lebanon a couple of months ago, is that something like 60 to 70,000 Israelis were forced to leave their homes in October of 2023, and this became an untenable situation. There was a lot of pressure on the Israeli government to do something about that. So just because the ceasefire isn't 100% holding today doesn't mean that it's a failure or anything like that. I think that, again, both sides have an interest in honoring it, at least in the near term.
You talked about the 2006 ceasefire, which also Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, mentioned. For those of us who maybe weren't paying as close attention in 2006, why is that an important reference point?
Oh, I just mainly it's just because it's the last one,
The
but
most
also,
recent?
yeah, but also again, the terms of this agreement are very similar to the ones of that agreement. There seems to be uh, at least some talk of there being some sort of United States monitoring mechanism to sort of check on everybody and make sure that this isn't being violated in any very, you know, glaring terms by either side. We should say also that, we think of the United States being automatically on the side of Israel in all cases, and that's true. But the United States also is the primary provider of arms and training to the Lebanese army. And the Lebanese army has a role in this agreement that, much like in 2006, they're supposed to displace Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. And in fact, it was their failure to do so in 2006 that had made the resolution in 2006 so ineffectual. And so we might hope that Lebanon does a better job of living up to its commitments by moving their army into the south than they did last time. The problem, however, though, is that the Lebanese state is much weaker now than it was then, and has been for quite a number of years, even leading up to last year's conflict. So the ability of Lebanon to actually honor this ceasefire might not be as great as it was in 2006, and that could be a problem. Still, again, if this ceasefire holds for any length of time, first of all, it's a good thing in and of itself, but it might form perhaps the basis of an agreement, or at least some sort of ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza.
Which, it's a great segue, Sam. There is no ceasefire, and Al Jazeera reports at least 33 Palestinians have been killed and 137 injured in Israeli attacks in the past 24-hour reporting period in the Gaza Strip, according to the territory's health ministry. So this ceasefire, in the northern border of Israel and Lebanon, between Israel and Hezbollah, is not stopping the violence in Israel's war in Gaza.
Quite the reverse, it would seem. But yeah, you're right. It's that it has no impact on Gaza thus far. However, one thing that we should mention is that the reason Hezbollah escalated their attacks on northern Israel in October of last year was in solidarity with Hamas. And until this week, Hezbollah insisted that they would maintain their attacks on northern Israel as long as Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza continued. And so one of the main developments that arises from the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is to decouple the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah from their conflict with Hamas. And that's a very serious development, right? If you can split Hezbollah off from Hamas, that sort of weakens the united front against Israel. And that's clearly a good thing from the Israeli perspective.
Just to put some data to this regarding the Hezbollah-Israel conflict, since it began in fall of last year, approximately 4,000 Lebanese have been killed, more than 16,000 injured. As Sam mentioned, several thousand Israelis have been displaced. 79 Israeli security forces have been killed. 45 civilians have been killed. So this is a war that has killed more than 4,000 and disrupted, what did you say, tens of thousands?
Yeah, 60 to 70,000.
Yeah, have had to have been
And that's
displaced.
on the Israeli side. It's
Sure.
thought to be up to 1 million Lebanese
Right.
on their side of the border.
Meanwhile, Gaza, again, we talk about Gaza, Hezbollah, they're a little bit abstract concepts. They're just news items. But remember, 1,200 people killed in Israel on October 7th, 2023, in the October 7th attacks by Hamas. Israel's war in Gaza has killed at least 44,000 Palestinians and wounded more than 100,000.
And
So,
all of Gaza is just decimated. I mean, there's almost no buildings left standing. It's a wasteland, and of course, winter is about to set in there. There were some places that people could still take shelter in Gaza last winter. That will not be the case this year. So the situation in Gaza is just horrific, and it's about to start getting worse just because of the weather. But to return to the ceasefire agreement, there's been attempts to make a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas ever since the war began. And in fact, there was a temporary ceasefire that resulted in 100 or so hostages being released last year, about a year ago, in fact. But one of the sticking points on the Hamas side against instituting a ceasefire with Israel was their insistence that Israel should withdraw entirely and immediately from Gaza as their condition to stop fighting Israel. This contrasts with the ceasefire that's just been instituted with Hezbollah and Lebanon. Israel is gradually reducing its forces in southern Lebanon just to ensure that the ceasefire is honored. So if Hezbollah can agree to a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces, well, then why can't Hamas? Right? So this doesn't just split Hezbollah and Hamas from one another rhetorically, but in terms of what they're able to accept or willing to accept from Israel. And so this, again, just on a strategic level, is a sort of victory for Israel, because they're weakening the united front of Hezbollah and Hamas, which, as we know, are both sort of clients, we might say, or affiliates of Iran, right? Israel always says that these are just proxies for Iran. And in fact, Iran themselves says that Israel is their own eternal enemy, and they arm the Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, various militias in Syria, as well as the government in Syria, as part of their eternal enmity with Israel. Along with all the rest of these developments, Iran themselves have been putting out feelers to the West, to the incoming Donald Trump administration, among other Western governments, that they are interested in coming to the table and negotiating. Now, these are embryonic developments. I think it'll take quite a lot of effort to put this together. But someone like Donald Trump, who fancies himself a great deal maker, although he isn't, but that's the way he likes to present himself, there's some idea that this could be appealing to him, right? Because not normalizing, really, but sort of de-escalating the conflict between Iran and all its neighbors would be a deal that would be just of such a large scale that it would make people take notice. It would be a big development. Now, I'm not saying that I think this is likely to happen, but there is a chance for it to happen, and there are people pushing in that direction. It's important to remember that the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is 85 years old. And I'm certain that inside of Iran, which has a very large state, right, and a very large power structure, there are factions that are wondering what's going to happen when Khamenei dies, which could happen at any moment. And so all of these things are sort of swirling around one another in rather interesting ways, but ways that I think that are very difficult to predict.
would it be would it be fair to say there is the opportunity potentially with Iran and the old leader either dying or stepping aside to undergo, I guess, what we might call a similar modernization to what happened in Saudi Arabia, right? Saudi Arabia kind of used to be similar to what Iran still is, in that they were very fundamentalist, theocratic, and the old leader kind of gave way to the son. MBS is the son, right? Or
That's right.
The younger
Mohammed
leader.
bin Salman.
Yeah. And now women can drive and things like this.
Yes,
right?
but nobody can vote.
Sure, but there's been a softening of the fundamentalist insanity.
Exactly. And that's as we know, one of the primary sources of discontent in Iran also.
Right.
As we talked about when Masa Amini was killed, and there were enormous protests, the woman life freedom protests in Iran, which was that 2 years ago? I don't know.
Yeah. It seems like, I believe 2 years ago. But yeah, so something like that could happen just because time.
Yes, but it's very difficult to game out. I would say it's impossible to actually game out the sequence of events under which this might occur. However, I would just want to add one additional point about this. We think of Iran as being in not quite an alliance, not like NATO, but a sort of loose alliance with China, Russia, and North Korea. Right? Iran is helping arm Russia in their conflict in Ukraine, which we'll discuss shortly, and so is North Korea. And so, and I'm happy that this is not caught on, but some sort of would-be defense policy egg brains have tried to acronymize this into the CRINC alliance, that is China, Russia, North Korea. Again, this has been happening for a couple months, but nobody's biting on this hook. And I'm happy to say so because, John, I'm telling you this right now. If people start routinely referring to the CRINC, I might have to quit this podcast, or I will not take part of this. It's terrible.
It doesn't have the lyrical ring of the Axis or the Central Powers?
It's not just, there's nothing good about it at all. But the point is that it seems as though if any of these sorts of developments, which again might be fanciful, right, but there is a glimmer of hope for them, that Iran might somehow be persuaded to not quite switch sides, but at least withdraw a little bit from their embrace of these other autocratic powers. Because in the end, they would much rather trade with the West.
Of course. Well, that's the dumbest thing about Iran. Like, Saudi Arabia is just corrupt and rich. They're out of the fundamentalist insanity business, or they're at least getting out of it. And it's like, Iran, just stop it. Just stop.
And so in the end, where would you rather be? Right. But I'm sure that there are factions inside of Iran that don't feel that way. Right. That would much rather stay aligned with China, Russia, and North Korea. Right. And so when Khamenei dies, which we don't know when that's going to be, there could be some sort of power struggle amongst the various factions. And we cannot at all predict how that's going to work out. And so, we shouldn't be making a lot of plans about any of these things. It's just the dynamics are just very interesting.
I would like to visit Tehran before I die. So
I would too. I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Shall we pivot to Ukraine?
Sure. We were sort of been moving in that direction anyway.
All right. CNN reporting today. Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened to strike Ukraine again with new nuclear-capable ballistic missile, with a new nuclear-capable ballistic missile. So that's not necessarily a nuke. Following Moscow's latest widespread attack on critical energy infrastructure. More than 1 million households in Ukraine were left without power following an overnight bombardment. That was Thursday. It's Russia's 11th large-scale assault on Ukraine's energy supplies this year alone, according to the energy ministry in Kyiv. This strategy from Russia has caused nationwide rolling blackouts in Ukraine. Putin was speaking at a security summit Thursday in Kazakhstan. I guess the Russians don't Neither the Russians nor the Kazakhs celebrate Thanksgiving. That's a joke. Putin claimed the overnight attacks were a response to strikes on Russian territory using U.S.-made missiles. I mean, that's dastardly, right? It gets cold in Ukraine over the winter. So, I mean, that is a deliberate and explicit move to try to gut the morale of the Ukrainians. Reporting from the AP, desertion is starving the Ukrainian army of desperately needed manpower and crippling its battle plans at a crucial time in its war with Russia. It could put Kiev at a clear disadvantage in future ceasefire talks. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops have walked away from combat and frontline positions to slide into anonymity, according to soldiers, lawyers, and Ukrainian officials. Again, this is the Associated Press reporting this. Some take medical leave and never return, haunted by the traumas of war and demoralized by bleak prospects of victory. Others clash with commanders and refuse to carry out orders, sometimes in the middle of firefights. That is not an army that is prepared to win a war.
Well, it would be difficult for them to do so. But let's back up a little bit. You touched on a number of elements there. And for instance, one of them is the use of Western weapons deeper inside Russia than they've been used before, which we haven't actually talked about. This actually happened a couple of weeks ago when Joe Biden agreed that Ukraine should be allowed to use the ATACMS missile system deeper inside Russia.
Only after Biden-Harris lost re-election.
Exactly. And they were followed in short order by France and the United Kingdom, who allowed their missile systems to be used in a similar way for the first time. And so that, we wanted to make sure that we mentioned that. The Russians, in response, as you said, started using this new experimental missile system, which is called the Oreshnik, which apparently I found out yesterday means hazelnut tree in Russian, which I thought seemed like a sort of benign name for a missile system.
Yeah.
But, and then I figured that might not be correct because this is a nuclear, they've sort of repurposed a nuclear capable missile to contain numerous conventional warheads, right? So this missile was designed for nuclear weapons, but they've just outfitted it instead with conventional explosive warheads. And it drops many of them in sequence. And it's also a hypersonic missile. So it's very difficult to shoot down. And perhaps, and I'm not an arborist, but perhaps when hazelnuts are ready to be harvested, they just drop off the tree in rapid succession. That might actually, I think, be the reason it's called that. But leaving that aside,
chilling poetry.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's actually sort of sinister, right, in a subtle way. If that's the reason, which it might not be, I might just be making this up. So now to address the desertion issue,
tens of thousands.
Yes, Ukraine just last week, I think it was, decriminalized desertion. In other words, if you desert and they catch you, as long as you go back to the front, they won't put you in jail, right? And this has apparently helped out a little bit, right? It's like, look, I don't want to imprison you, and you don't want to go to jail. You've got a country to fight for, and so they've put a number of people back on the front lines the way, but you still have to catch them, right? It's still kind of an inefficient use of police resources to try and find these people.
Sam, we have been trying to wage a political war in this country, or at least a political argument in this country, about the importance of Ukraine resisting Russian belligerence and what a critical linchpin in the stability of Europe this is. How are we supposed to convince Congress of either party majority that they're supposed to back the Ukrainians if tens of thousands of their own troops are deserting?
Well, I think the way to do it would be to say something like, if we can't arm these people, They can't win, and they know that. And they also know that we've been dragging our feet in allowing them to use our weapons in a really substantial way.
Sure,
Right?
I understand that, but a bad faith rebuttal to that would be, why should we give these people help? They won't even fight on their own.
But they have been fighting. I mean, that's just simply not true.
I mean, right? I know it's been 3 years. I know
they've been holding the line.
But you're going to hear that. You and I are both going to hear this as a reason to cut Ukraine completely.
Okay, I mean, I'm not certain what we're going to hear. Actually, perhaps we can get to that next. But before we do that, before we come back to the domestic side of this, Vladimir Putin is losing men and armaments at a staggering rate, much higher than Ukraine is losing them. There are,
but they have more to lose.
Yes, but there are people who know much more about these things than I do, who will say that they're actually losing tanks and other kinds of armaments faster than they're producing them, and they are in fact producing them very quickly, to the point where Vladimir Putin called last week for a 30% increase in defense spending next year. And the Russian parliament ratified that request, I think, yesterday or the day before. And so they're trying to ramp it up, but they're already producing and fighting and losing people at just an astonishing rate. And the question is, and this informs the discussion that might take place on our side of the ocean, how much longer can Putin do this? Does he care, actually? What a drain on resources this is. And in fact, I just found out the other day that the Russian ruble has been lost so much value that it's back to where it was shortly after the war began, which was very, very low. And so there's a question as to how easy it would be for Russia to continue this war and how Putin thinks about that. He might not even care. He might actually believe all the crazy things he said at the beginning of the war, but we don't know.
So this is like a crazy game of chicken. Neither side really has his path to sustainability to win the war.
That's right. And I mean, honestly,
it's so grim.
Ukraine, I think, could win the war if people could arm them, but that would involve ramping up Western armament production by a factor of several times. Right? We and our Western allies would have to start producing much more weaponry than we are. And that, we've failed to do that over the past 2 years.
What an opportunity to onshore some American manufacturing jobs.
Well, I mean, you will recall that when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was here in the United States a couple of months ago, he visited a munitions factory in Pennsylvania.
Right.
I mean, this was not an accident.
Look, if you take Trump and his rhetoric and kind of mega quasi-isolationism, I don't even want to credit it with that level of coherent philosophy, but if you divorce kind of our current political moment and you just present anybody who knows American culture with an opportunity to like open factories that make bullets and guns to send to someone to fight the Russians. Like, how is that not a winner? How is that not just an absolute winner?
I think that you have a perhaps oversimplified idea of American culture. Okay, isolationism.
People need jobs.
Okay, look, I get that, but isolationism is not a new phenomenon
I understand.
in the United States. Right?
I understand.
And it seems to be having an actual resurgence. And much as we might find that distasteful, that doesn't make it less real.
Do we have to tip our cap to Russian propaganda a little bit?
No, I suppose a little bit. But one thing that we should make sure that we mention is that also this week, Trump named as his envoy to Ukraine a retired general by the name of Keith Kellogg.
Oh, Kellogg,
who served on the national security staff of then Vice President Mike Pence during Trump's first term. And Kellogg, again, is a retired general. When the war in Ukraine began 2.5 years ago, he was originally very hawkish about this. He said we cannot allow Russia to win. Since then, he's moderated that, I mean, in part that possibly just because of the way things have played out on the battlefield. But he authored a peace plan, or a sort of draft of a peace plan for the America First Policy Institute back in April, which calls for a ceasefire along, whatever the current battle lines are, and for both Russia and Ukraine to sit down for negotiations. Interestingly, I believe, he said that continued military aid for Ukraine would depend on Ukraine agreeing to sit down for negotiations, right? And unless Russia decided to sit down at the negotiating table, military aid to Ukraine would increase.
Okay. I see what you're saying. So the United States could play kind of an equal opportunity screw tightening.
That's right. And the main point I would make about this is that he's not saying, let's just cut Ukraine loose.
Right.
And now we don't know if that plan that Kellogg authored 7 months ago is actually what the policy that Trump wants to pursue. But if it weren't, why would he name this guy? Right? Maybe he just wants a figurehead, and he does intend to just cut off Ukraine. That's certainly possible. He said many, many times on the campaign trail that he does seem to want to at least consider doing that, right? But there's a chance that that the negotiations might not end up being all that different from what they had been had Kamala Harris won the election, for example, right? I think that the idea of Ukraine gaining all its territory back just doesn't seem like a strong possibility from a military perspective.
Right.
Right. Again, it would involve ramping up arms production and stuff like this. And are we really going to do that? I wouldn't mind, but if it would seem to be a bigger project than the United States has any appetite for doing right now.
I know that you and I and others who have been hawkish about stopping aggressive Russia, right now, understand the lessons of the 1930s, right, and just general appeasement. But is there kind of a middle path where maybe there's a negotiated settlement, and Russia gets some of Ukraine and it's partitioned, but Ukraine still exists as a state, and Russia can't then start rolling over? Why are you laughing at me?
Well, I mean, because there is one, and it's called Korea, right?
Right, but okay, but totally. But we're worried about Russia then knocking on, Poland's door, right? We're worried about the stability of Europe. Isn't Russia kind of crippled, at least for the moment?
Well, I don't.
Couldn't it just become like Korea, which is
okay?
better?
I don't know. Okay, I think the Korea.
You see what
analogy,
I'm getting at, right? Though.
I do see what you're getting at. I think the Korean analogy is flawed in many ways, mainly because what we have in Korea is North Korea and South Korea, right? What we would have in Ukraine is Ukraine and Russia,
right?
In other words, Russia didn't take over North Korea, right? They became their own state. Right. The eastern part and some of the southern parts of Ukraine would be absorbed into the much larger Russian state. And that's a different strategic calculation.
I totally understand that. And it's obviously suboptimal.
Yes, but I think.
But it's not Ukraine being erased, and it's not Russia knocking on Poland's door.
All right, but this comes back to,
at least not immediately.
Yeah, and the other another.
Jesus, I sound like Neville Chamberlain.
Sort of, yeah.
I know it's not good.
Another aspect of the Kellogg plan would be that Ukraine would postpone its bid for NATO membership. All right. Now, of course, Ukraine.
I don't like that.
I don't like that either. But I don't think we should get married or even engaged or even seriously date the Korea analogy. Right. I mean, it's a framework for understanding, perhaps, but we shouldn't make much more of it than it actually is. But again,
this war is going to end because neither side can sustain it. That's the point.
Okay. What I need to know is, and what I don't think we can answer is, does Putin get that? right?
Okay, fair enough.
Right? And because we all seem to think that this is about what we do. It really isn't. Right? It's about, we could propose peace talks and sit down and negotiate, and then Putin might just say, yeah, you know what, I'm winning.
I'll fight to the last man.
That's right. And in fact, being at war helps me become more of an autocrat at home. I can crack down on my own people much more easily if I'm in a state of war than if I'm at peace. Now, of course, some of the people underneath him might be like, look, we can't sustain this, right? We can't keep producing all these weapons. This is, and he might be crazy enough that he just wouldn't care, right? He actually does mean it. He means to erase Ukraine. He means to plunge Europe into war forever. It's possible that that's where he's at. I don't know.
All right, well, we'll wrap up on that light note.
Yeah. And next week, actually going right now this week, we know that there are elections going on in Ireland, Romania, Namibia.
We still have elections.
That's right. I think we'll want to take a close look at the Romanian elections, obviously, because they border Ukraine, and so they're that all the issues we talk about will be figuring in there. Also, we should update last week. COP29 wrapped up with an agreement of $300 billion being provided from rich countries to poorer countries to help them adapt and mitigate against climate change, which was more than the $250 billion,
but lower than the trillion.
Yeah, lower than the 1.3 trillion
1.3, yeah.
that the poorer nations wanted. So that's another reason why they're all mad at us, as well they should be. But as we wrap up this episode, we've been talking about the Middle East and Ukraine. If you look at the map that we'll be putting up, what's that right in between Ukraine and the Middle East, John? It's Turkey. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Oh, that's good. I don't know if we can top that.
I don't think so.
No.
We might as well quit while we're ahead.
Yeah. Okay. In Los Angeles, Sam, I'm John. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next Friday with another edition of Working for Rousseau. Peace.
Hola.